Well, there was some positive news today from the Health Secretary with the vaccine rollout currently on target, but he did also warn of complacency and said pressure on the NHS will grow if people don't follow the rules and stay at home. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, said today that the current lockdown rules may not be tough enough. Well, joining me to take a look through the big political stories of the day are Sarah Southern, former aide to David Cameron, also Sonia Sodha, chief leader writer at The Observer and former senior policy advisor to Ed Miliband. A great afternoon to you. Good to see you. Thanks for being with us. What a week it's been. Unbelievable. Sarah, let's start with you. I'm sure you heard Matt Hancock on TV this morning. We should start with the good news, really, shouldn't we? The government seems to be on target when it comes to the rollout of the vaccine, on course to reach 2 million jabs a week, currently at around 200,000 a day. He also said a third of the over 80s have had the vaccination.
Yeah, I mean, that is the great news of this week, where I think we should grab onto some good news when there is some. There has been a lot of vaccinations given out this week, thanks to the hard work of people within the NHS. And I think next week, hopefully, we'll see even more. These 7 centres across the UK are going to be opened, like at the Nightingale Hospital and indeed at the Life Science Centre in Newcastle. So we'll see a load more people get vaccinated in the next week or so.
Yes, Sarah. I mean, do you think that the 15 million target by mid-February is achievable? It needs, it needs around 300,000 people being vaccinated a day.
Well, if supply is there, I think that, if we're able to get the Moderna vaccine in, as well as, the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, then there should be more supply that we can then do more people. But 15 million does seem very optimistic, but I think they've got to aim high. They can't be aiming low and they're not achieving it.
Sonia, we've been disappointed before, haven't we, during this pandemic, when promises have been made and then not achieved. What are your feelings? 15 million by mid-February, every adult vaccinated by the autumn.
Well, I think the government literally has to pull out all the stops to make it happen. And you're right, Jonathan, there have been a series of quite serious logistical failures in this pandemic, most notably, I think, with the test, track and trace scheme, which just hasn't really worked that well. It was contracted out to these big contractors who had poor records of delivery with government. We just weren't seeing it achieving what it needed to achieve to keep a lid on the pandemic. So, the government has made some serious logistical errors. However, I think there is a bit of a cause for optimism here, which is that the NHS is really primarily responsible for the rollout here. Actually, from some of the reports coming out over the last few days or so, it sounds like the NHS, the chief executive of NHS England, Simon Stevens, has been keeping a very close eye on delivery plans, and it's really him who's responsible for kind of the detail of the delivery rather than ministers getting very involved. And actually, I think that's probably a good thing. The NHS has a track record, obviously on a much smaller scale, of delivering mass vaccination programmes every winter season with the flu vaccination. This is, as I said, on a completely different scale altogether, so it is incredibly ambitious. But I do think that there is more cause for optimism that the government will fulfil what it needs to do here than it has done on some other big logistical operational aspects of this pandemic.
Yeah, so that's the positive news, I guess, Sarah. The less positive news is the data that's coming through and the numbers of people catching COVID-19. And also, we've spoken on Sky News to plenty of doctors, healthcare workers, those on the front line who genuinely believe that hospitals are just days away from being overwhelmed, if not already.
Yes, it's extremely worrying, and I think that's why we as the public have got to take it really seriously and follow the rules and stay at home. We shouldn't be putting ourselves in a position where we can catch it, or indeed, be involved in an accident, say, and put more pressure onto the NHS. It is deeply worrying, and I think we've just got to hope that there is a break in this spike to allow the NHS to deal with the current patients that they have. And I think it's also of deep concern to many people that regular operations perhaps aren't happening at the moment, which will take a long time to catch up throughout 2021.
Just staying with that, Sarah, with people sticking to the rules, the government clearly making an extra effort to try and persuade the public to do just that. Matt Hancock saying this morning every flex can be fatal. He also discussed the case of those two women fined a couple of £100 each for basically meeting up in a park and having a coffee. Where do you stand on that? Do you think the police are being overzealous in some cases?
In that case, it did feel as though they were being a little overzealous. They'd driven to a park. You're allowed to exercise with one other person from a different household. 5 miles seems to be within the local area if you live quite rurally. So I think it's a shame. And I think it kind of makes us just feel a bit uncomfortable. Are we going to be watched all the time? I noticed that the police were moving people on from sitting on benches. Is that what we're not allowed to do now? You know, if you don't have a garden, it's quite essential that you can go outside and get some fresh air and a bit of sunlight. And I don't think sitting on a park bench on your own should necessarily be something you're fined for.
Yeah, Sonia, we're looking at pictures now of people out and about yesterday. Cold but beautiful day for many of us. And, you have to have sympathy with people cooped up inside all day. They're allowed to go out for a bit of exercise. But then, you sit down on a bench and the police come and tap on your shoulder.
Yeah, I think it's about a proportionate approach to this, isn't it? And, certainly I think the data suggests that people are sticking to the rules, certainly more than they were in November anyway. But the fact of the matter is that this is a laxer lockdown. So while it may, send a strong message to get the police being overzealous and going out and finding people, I agree with Sarah. I think it felt like they took too harsh a line with people who were actually doing what was within the law in the case of those two women in Derbyshire. So you can do that. But I think there are actually questions. We know this variant is much more infectious, yet we've got a lockdown that is less strict than it was in March to May. More of the economy is operating normally, so there are more people going out to work. So I think, if we're not seeing this lockdown have the impact that it has, that's just as likely to be about the rules not being strict enough rather than people not complying with the rules. And I think in the interviews you saw ministers give this morning, most notably Matt Hancock this morning, he sort of seemed to shift all the responsibility onto the public. If we don't get this under control, it shows that the public aren't compliant and it's the public's fault. I don't think that's the case, actually. I think the government needs to look at the lockdown itself. It needs to look if it will come at a greater cost, but the vaccine is just around the corner. If it does need to shut down more areas of the economy that are operating normally compared to where they were in March to May. And I think it needs to look at enabling people financially to stick by the rules. So most notably, there are some people who are not entitled to sick pay if they're self-isolating at home, for example. There are people who have completely miss out on the furlough scheme because they haven't been self-employed long enough, for example. And so there are people who find it really difficult financially to afford to stay at home and not to go out to work. And those are the people that I think the government needs to be taking another look at, because I think the evidence is the public is willing to comply. But can they? Is there enough support there?
Yes, Sarah, you're nodding your head. And of course, those were points that were made by Sir Keir Starmer as well today, that we need to help those in society who perhaps feel that they have no choice but to break the lockdown in order to go to work.
I can completely empathise with those people. As a self-employed person myself, I've had an extremely difficult time financially over the last 10 months or so. So I do have huge empathy for those people. I think that the government support that has been given has been very generous, but unfortunately it has missed people in the margins. And often those people are unable to get any help. And as you say, if the option is earning no money for 10 days or going to work, you're going to go to work.
And Sarah, just on that point about a tougher lockdown, if more help was available for those people that you've just talked about, do you think we should have even tighter restrictions?
I think that we are quite tight at the moment. I mean, for me, as somebody who lives alone, I would hate for us to, for example, remove support bubbles. As there were certainly weeks and weeks that I went in that first lockdown without seeing a single person. So I think we've got to consider, yes, the disease spreading, but also the mental health of people and the impact that it's having on people by being isolated for such a prolonged period of time.
And just finally, just want to touch on politics in America, Sonia, if that's OK. I mean, incredible scenes in the middle of the week. Donald Trump now taken off Twitter. Just reflect on those scenes and indeed whether it was right for Twitter to take that action.
Oh, I think it was right for Twitter to take that action. In fact, I think that social media platforms have been too slow to act about messages from the president that risk inciting hatred, that risk inciting violence. I think what was extraordinary about the scenes that we saw on the Capitol this week was they were sort of really shocking, but they weren't unsurprising. If you've been following this closely in the days running up to that, people were talking about on social media, they were talking about on Facebook for a couple of days before it got shut down, then on other platforms, they were making plans to storm the Capitol. So I think what was, and we always sort of knew there was a risk that Donald Trump presidency was going to end in this, because he is a president who seems to know no bounds in terms of stoking the public and making these, outrageous claims that the election was stolen from him when there is absolutely no evidence that it was at all.
Oh, Sonia seems to have frozen. Sarah, let's get a final thought from you, Sarah.
What we saw in America this week was absolutely appalling. I think all of us who believe in true democracy were shocked by it all. I know the last time I visited the Congress, when I worked in politics, they confiscated a packet of peanuts from me. So security clearly has got a lot more lax, and I'd be interested to see what happens in with the inquiries that happen around this, and how the policing was not strong enough to stop those people storming the building.
Great to get your views. As always, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Sarah Southern, Sonia Sodha, thanks very much.